So welcome to the mid-month of May webinar. It's already halfway through May, which I'm not sure many of us have picked up one because it has been a fast month, especially since the April Summit. I think for many of us, raise your hand if you went to Summit, if you attended Summit. I would love to see if any of you were there. We had some really great sessions. I'm still going through the virtual pieces to get through some of those sessions myself. So I'm glad that several of you were able to attend. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Tracy Collum. I'm the Associate Dean for the Graduate School at Idaho State University. I also help coordinate our webinars for NAGAP. So this is our monthly scheduled time, and then we have several webinars throughout the rest of the month on different topics or maybe from vendors. This particular webinar is on graduate market research findings and was part of the Professional Development Institute at the summit the day before the summit started. And there is a piece that we wanted to share with the rest of the membership so that you would be able to have some data to go with your research findings. If you attended or registered for the PDI and wanted to have a recording of it, this part will be added to the rest of the recorded piece from the original PDI a few weeks ago. So a few things that you just need to know. If you have questions, we are going to have those taken throughout the piece. You do not have to wait until the end of the webinar. Feel free to throw those in the Q&A box down at the bottom. That way we can monitor those questions and get those answered as we go. If you do want to throw them in the chat, just make sure you are putting them in with me, Tracy Collum, so that way I can send those over to Scott. But if you'll throw them in the Q&A box, that'll help us be able to answer them as we go. Any other things, feel free to chat me with those. We have several webinars scheduled over the next 2 months, so please go to the NAGAP website to find those webinars, put them on your calendar, save the date, so that way you'll have those recordings whenever you're ready to watch them or watch them live. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Scott Jeffy, who is with Ruffalo Noel Levitz. He is going to provide us with the market research findings that we are all waiting to hear about. So Scott, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you today. As you heard, my name is Scott Jeffy. I'm Vice President for Research in the graduate and online space at Ruffalo Noel Levitz, RNL. And I've spent my entire career focused on market research, market insights. I started my career with Carol Esselinian, who literally wrote the book on why adults go back to school when they do in 1980. I joined her in 1996. And by that point, we were doing a lot more than just adult undergrad. We even before I joined her, she was doing studies of the graduate population. We started doing online studies. In the latter years, I was with Carol for 23 years. We were focusing a lot on the post-traditional student, meaning that individual, by the way, graduate or undergraduate of any age, but one that is not proceeding with their educational experience probably the way most of us did, meaning full-time, traditional, day, residential, and so on. So we did a lot of that work. I always say that the one thing that I am not expert at in any way is the traditional 18-year-old. So that's kind of my background. We in those 23 years we did customized market research studies for probably more than 300 institutions all over the country, where we would do survey work, and in some cases focus groups and so on. And about 2 years ago, I joined RNL. And the focus of the work that we do at RNL is a little bit different. It's much more about leveraging secondary data to help institutions make affordable and timely decisions. But that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about today is what's the work that's really in my heart. And that is the findings from 2 surveys focused on the graduate population that we recently completed. There are 2 studies that I'm going to share the results with you. I like to think of those kind of as one that's going to talk about the state of the industry. I hate to call higher education an industry, but I will. And then one that focuses on the state of the market. And what do I mean by that, those two terms? One is a survey that we jointly produced with NAGAP. Many of you perhaps participated in this, but it was a survey of graduate enrollment and marketing leaders about what you are doing on your campuses. So it's kind of a state of the industry. I will make the point here that it does not necessarily mean a study of best practices, because we're not all doing best practices. It's a study of current practices. And so I just like to make that point because, you know, there are always areas where probably what we're doing today needs to be improved to meet the needs of the students. And so that's kind of where the second study comes in, which is, I'm giving you a preview. I'm not, this study isn't even published until late next month, but it is our brand new survey of 1,500 prospective graduate students of all ages and stations. And I'm going to give you a preview of what we found out, soup to nuts, right from what they're going to study, how they're going to study, and then there's a lot about how they are making their decisions on where to enroll and the resources. So there's a lot of good information for marketers and enrollment folks. But I always start in in anything that I do, I advocate for questions about what I think of as a kind of the product, what those things that you offer, because you could have you could be doing the best marketing in the world, and if you don't have the programs in the ways that students need them configured today, you're going to be kind of, pardon the expression, sometimes you can be pouring good money after bad or whatever that, I'm probably butchering that. I'm famous for butchering those comments. So anyway, let's dive in here. As I said, the first is our Graduate Student Marketing Practices Report 2021, jointly produced with NAGAP. That's going to be available later this summer. It will be something that we will be fully rolling out in the fall. But we're going to make sure, certainly as a co-sponsor, the membership of NAGAP will get it as soon as it's out, even before we start, you know, kind of making the splash, so you will. So you think. It is based on a survey that included 92 institutions, 30 public, 62 privates. It was an online survey conducted in January and February of this past year. And I'm sorry, that says June still. With juggling everything, that's going to actually probably be late July. All right, so I'm going to give the slides a moment to come through. Let's first talk about what the marketing organization is looking like at the publics and privates in the survey. First, let's look at who is responsible for graduate marketing. What we see here is that the central marketing office is leading among private institutions. Half of the private institutions indicate that marketing emanates from a central institutional marketing office. Whereas at the public, it is still in that kind of hybrid approach, the shared responsibility of a central office and all the various or whatever various of the schools and departments. There are pluses and minuses to both, certainly in this era of the sophistication of the student, having the primary responsibility in those central marketing offices or a graduate level recruitment or marketing office is probably the way I think that institutions are needing to go, simply because leaving it in the hands of schools and departments, you just either have to have a well-versed expert in every one of the schools, or perhaps being in a position where the sophistication of the marketing may not be as good as it needs to be to reach those students when they, you know, in a sense, the world is their set of choices, or at least the nation in some cases. Anyway, I digress. But who is responsible for graduate recruitment? At the public institutions, again, this is a graduate enrollment admissions office, somewhat a centralized operation, but specifically at the graduate level, as opposed to a central office in the schools and departments dealing with recruitment, or a central enrollment and admissions office. If I were to offer my own opinion, I would say that a graduate level enrollment operation and admissions operation is, after looking at these types of things at several hundred colleges over the years, probably is the way to go. What concerns me about a central enrollment office for all levels is that graduate has a very, as we all know, graduate has a very different set of unique factors. And in some cases, in many cases, if it's housed in the overall university enrollment office, it can kind of be subsumed under all that needs to happen with those traditional undergrads. But anyway, I digress again. What are we saying? The publics are indeed predominantly in a shared structure where there's a central office, and schools and departments do that, very closely followed by a graduate enrollment or admissions office. And finally, let's look at the last thing. Who's responsible for graduate cultivation, meaning that second stage from the receipt of the inquiry or the application through to when the individual is in a seat. And again, at the privates, the graduate enrollment office handles that in half the cases. And in the publics, it is again shared between the school and that central office. If you've seen past reports, and we've done this a couple of times with NAGAP, this is a more detailed version of a question that we asked in the past about centralized and decentralized operations. We used to ask one question: is your graduate marketing and enrollment office centralized, hybrid, or decentralized? And various stakeholders in the planning process said, I'd love to, we really need to know more. And so we broke it out between, as we see here, marketing, recruitment, and then the cultivation, so we would be able to better understand what those practices are on campuses today. Okay, so we're going to move on. The marketing plans. The first question was, is graduate education included in the strategic enrollment plan at your institution? Yes, we've got two circles here. Private is on the inside, public is on the outside. Upwards of 80% say yes, it is graduate education is included in the strategic enrollment plan. There's just a little bit more that said no, but it will be soon. There are a very small proportion that say no, it is not included at all. And then perhaps the diciest part of the population is the portion that has no strategic enrollment plan at all. So anyway, as we say, this is not always best practice. It's just what's going on. Let's look at, do you have a standout or pull out graduate marketing and recruitment plan within or alongside the strategic enrollment plan? Roughly 40% of publics, half of privates say they have a standalone graduate marketing plan. An additional more than 1/3 of both say that they have a graduate component in the institutional marketing plan. And finally, the 20% of publics and 15% of privates do not have the inclusion of graduate in their institutional marketing plan, which again, with the sophistication that's being required of the entire process, it's pretty important, I would say, for there to be a plan that from which everything emanates. Okay, so then we asked, what is the focus of your graduate marketing and recruitment plan? We had three choices. Specific program, by the way, and people could select more than one. They could select all that apply. Specific program promotion, general brand awareness, or specific school promotions. The reason that I think that this question is more important, is really important, is in the most recent data that I asked our partners at Google for, covering the mid-2019 through mid-2020, we were kind of going for a period just before the pandemic. Upwards of 70%, almost 80% of searches for graduate programs did not include the name of a school. It was perhaps master's in X topic perhaps in state XYZ or region Northeast or whatever. And so what that says to me is that brand awareness raising is probably less important than perhaps it once was, whereas marketing of the specific programs you have is probably an incredibly important aspect based on those factors. Okay, so 92% are doing specific program promotion. These are privates. 58% are doing general brand awareness, and 28% are doing specific school promotion. It's very similar findings in the public. 91% doing specific programs, 68% doing general brand awareness, and 36% doing specific school promotion. Perhaps those are in many cases advertising campaigns that promote a cluster of programs in the business school or the School of Human Development or whatever that might be. All right. The next topic, the issue of what do marketing budgets look like today? The first question is, do you have a distinct graduate marketing budget? And 61% of publics and 71% of privates do indeed report that they have a specific marketing budget for their graduate programs, which is a very good start. We asked some questions trying to get some understanding for all of you about what happened due to the pandemic. Were there mid-year marketing budget reductions due to the pandemic was included in that question. 76% of publics and 61% of privates said no, they weren't. So there was a little bit more of a give back needed at private institutions than at the publics, which was a surprise to me. That may be a function of the sample, but that is what we did indeed find out. We followed up that question by asking individuals whether they expected increases, decrease, or no change to their marketing budget for the upcoming year. And indeed, what we found was one quarter in these tough times, the fact that one quarter were confident that they were going to see an increase in their marketing budget. That was a good sign. 68% of privates and 59% of public said no change. And less than 10% or less, well, 12% or less, said that they were expecting a decrease. When we combine these with the data that has been released now for the second semester in a row, the second COVID semester, if you will call it, pardon me calling it that, where master's degrees, graduate certificates, even doctoral degrees are the only areas of higher education that grew, according to the way National Clearinghouse looks year over year, so spring to spring, fall to fall. It certainly is a time to invest in graduate programs, and of course, you can't. The investment, in a certain sense, is the essential element of that investment is marketing your programs. In those dozens and dozens of studies that Carol and I would do over the course of each year, when we were talking to, we were doing primary research among students, the number of individuals in those surveys that didn't know anything about whatever the college we might have been working for was alarming. But it's a sign that just because an institution, sometimes even a well-known institution or a high-profile institution, where when you ask a survey respondent that is in the process of looking for a graduate program, and they say that the extent of their knowledge about high-profile institution X, Y, or Z is, I know that it's there. That's a sign that probably there needs to be, even for high-profile institutions, more information put out in public in the places that they go to first. And we're going to get a preview of what those are when we look at the student research that's coming up. Finally, what did the respondents report as their marketing budget for the year? The average in 2020 to 2021 was 412,000, which is a sizable number at private institutions, and 598,000 at the publics. what's interesting is I was talking to a coworker at RNL that handles that is in the digital marketing space, where we can. There's a whole division now at RNL that helps graduate level institutions and programs market their programs, leveraging these digital resources that have become increasingly important, as we'll see in the student findings. And I asked, what would $600,000 do in the fully comprehensive kinds of marketing campaigns that we would do on a program by program basis? And just to give you a sense of the kind of scope of that, it's a huge range, but that might be 6 or 7 programs. And when you think about the number of programs that a typical institution has, that fantastic number may not go as far as, certainly won't go as far as it once did. So anyways, that's just a little bit about what we found in that survey. We asked the institution, all the respondents, kind of a set of cascading questions about the advertising strategies that they use. We asked them whether they used it, but then we also asked them, rate how effective you think this is in actually landing in generating inquiries or leads. Sometimes those are those stealth applicants these days. I think the thing that has concerned me a little bit both times that I've been involved in this particular study is the differential between used and the proportion that indicate that it is effective or very effective, which is the second rank set of numbers in each one of these 2 sets of columns. And I guess the reason that I think that is, when every dollar counts is dearer than it ever has been. In some cases, granted, this is a qualitative assessment of effectiveness. We didn't ask for numbers or anything, but when there's a huge differential between being used and being effective, it reminds me of an institution that I worked at when I way back before I was in my first job, where there was. The institution I worked at was doing bus ads, and nobody thought that they were doing anything, but all the other schools around us were doing them. And so even though they're completely unquantifiable, of course, so long ago, they were still being used just because kind of inertia or peer pressure. I don't know what it is, but so let's just look at these data. 90% indicate that they are employing ads on Facebook or other social media networks. 71 and by the way, 85% of publics, 90% of privates. 71% of privates think that that's effective or highly effective. 63% of publics do. What's going to be really interesting is I have some similar data from the student survey about what they're doing with what they think of social media, and it's surprising. I'll give you a preview. Pay-per-click ads on search engines, 80% are using them, and the private 65% think they're effective, and 78% versus 70% thinking they're effective on the public. Retargeted ads that appear on other websites after visiting your institution website with Next, and so on. By the way, I've ordered these by the publics just because I needed to have a column for which to organize the data. Online display advertising, and then we see the first more traditional media, which was print media, ads, radio ads, video ads, and billboards and those buses that I mentioned. And so I think the takeaway for me here is that there's a heavy emphasis these days on digital marketing, which everything that I've done over the last year would endorse. And certainly when we see the student data, I think we'll see that that's a very wise application of what are very dear marketing dollars these days. All right. So that's just a quick run through of the high points of that study. I guess I will pause if there are any questions that anybody would like to ask about that before we look at the prospective graduate students survey. and think about what we just saw as we look at the data that is coming from the student's perspective. Anything out there for us?
No, not yet. Does anybody
Okay.
have any they want to throw in there at this moment?
Sure.
I don't see any right now, Scott.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm going to proceed. Please don't feel shy about putting them in the box and having and interrupting me. That's typical. I think that's the best way to do this. Sometimes there's just a question that you have in real time, and I'm happy to have that asked as such. So, okay, as I said, this was a survey of 1,500 prospective graduate students nationwide. They reflect all modes of learning, all credential types and ages, and we're actually going to look at a couple of those, a couple of those factors broke out at the beginning of these slides here. It was also conducted during January and February of this past winter, and the report is going to be published. Actually, we've moved this one up a little bit, so it'll be late June, just before our national conference, which will be on July 7th and 8th, and a virtual conference. With a full-scale graduate and online track for the second year in a row, which is very exciting to me. Okay, well, there's a lot of information on this. I'm going to do this counterclockwise. Yes?
We do have a question. Do you want to go ahead and review it?
Yeah.
Well, we have a few now, so I think they were getting them typed. What trends do you believe will continue even with the return to face-to-face events and marketing in the near future?
Great question. I think, and this is just Scott Jeffy's prognostication with everything that I review on a day-to-day basis, I think that pretty much everything that we have been doing that was further developed during the pandemic is going to continue. At the same rate, maybe not. But let's think about this. Everything that we have become used to over the last 16 to 18 months, having pretty much anything available to us that we used to do in person online. So I think human nature is going to be like anything that at an individual literally does not want to specifically do in person, they're going to expect will be available online. I was having a conversation with my 2 nephews and 3 of their friends, who I always pump for. They're in undergraduate school right now. They're traditional undergrads. They did not love their remote learning. But when I asked them a question that got around to, okay, so you want to go back to the classroom? Absolutely, yes, yes, yes. I said, would there be instances where you would want to do a class online? And without hesitation, there was, oh God, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to sit in a classroom for my history class or, you know, all these types of examples. And so even with that, in some cases, let's say it might be pretty poor because we didn't have any time to make them really high quality. Even with that substandard or standard remote learning, anything that a student doesn't want to do in the classroom, specifically in the classroom now, I think that they're going to expect is going to be available online. I think that just one more thing. I think that the rise of virtual recruiting events is one of the things that is also actually going to specifically remain positive. And I say that because even before the pandemic, in the survey work that I've been doing for the last 10 years, we were seeing fewer and fewer people wanting to go to indicating that they would go to a face-to-face open house, and a rising number. Now, these were smaller numbers of individuals saying that they were going to log into some sort of virtual event. So that was already on the rise beforehand, and then we've just put steroids on it. So that's how I'd answer that. Another question?
Yes. So what about lead generation websites that many grad schools employ? They are digital, but not related to social media.
Well, I think that what you're going to see here is that those continue to be used and accessed by graduate students. I think I'll leave that one to just take a look at the data there. But I think that those are continuing to be used. I think less so than in their heyday, when they were the only way, like that original, that gradschools.com. At one point, that was the only way you could kind of disperse nationwide in an affordable way. But I think I know that they're still a factor. So yeah.
That is all the questions for right now, Scott.
Okay. Well, let's look at some of the highlights of what I call the type of study questions. First of all, what are they planning to study? We put all the options on the table. Roughly half are in master's programs. It's a great sizable number. But to me, and this is something I often do, I think perhaps the rest of it is the most important. Roughly 10% are in doctoral programs, but that means that 40% of this graduate population is planning on something other than a degree, which to me is astounding. Most likely a postgraduate certificate. What we see the other options are, we have slightly upwards of 10 of a post-baccalaureate certificate. Another 10% that might do a post-baccalaureate certification or licensure. We see the smallest portion being postgraduate certification or licensure. I think those, in some people's minds, we didn't have the descriptions there. I think the certificate and the certification assessed licensure can be a little bit muddy in some people's minds when they're answering a questionnaire like this. But the takeaway is that a substantial proportion are looking at graduate level certificates and or certification programs. I'm going to go down. You'll see those little arrows to kind of follow counterclockwise. What proportion are looking for these offerings to be about? And I should have oriented you. All the data are organized by individuals that indicated their primary program preferences: online in the yellow-green, hybrid in the light blue, classroom in the darker blue. So with looking at enrollment status, what we see here is that the largest proportions that are planning to enroll in a full-time program are online students. Sometimes it's easier to do that when in the way many online programs are structured. Not surprisingly, students that prefer classroom programs are most likely to want a part-time program, probably because of all that they're juggling in their lives, with that 80% of graduate students being that plus 25, likely being the working professional, as opposed to the 20% that were like me and went right on to a master's program immediately after undergraduate study. Now, what are those proportions that are forming our yellow, light blue, and dark green? Across the bottom, you'll see the pie chart. Just 20% of the sample indicated that they plan to enroll in a fully classroom program, while 48% are planning to enroll in some hybrid program that blends online and classroom instruction in any number of ways, not just each class, but some mix of classroom and online courses and so on. And then 32% are planning to enroll in a fully online program. Now, these may look off to you. It may depend on your institutional perspective, but here's what I can tell you. NCES data on fall enrollment indicate that roughly 33% of graduate students, and that, of course, that data would be fall 2019, were enrolled in what they call all distance courses. So that's pretty accurate. The 20%, now what does that look like? Well, in the studies that Carol Aslanian and I were doing up to 18 months ago, we were seeing we might get up to 30% sometimes, but we were seeing somewhere between 30 and about 22% of individuals saying that they were planning to enroll in a fully classroom program. So that gives us a sense of the sea change in what's happening in our graduate programs. All right. So then the next element is, how long do they want their courses? As an aside, I would say that in all the studies that Carol and I would do, we would generally see much more interest in shorter courses than necessarily a shorter program. Typically, a shorter program means less flexibility, because it's kind of high. It may be a cohort or so on, and part of the reason you get done fast is because It's just boom, 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 boom. But the idea of shorter courses has certainly taken hold. Granted, if we look way over on the right-hand side, we do see that 61% of the classroom students are looking for, basically semester-length courses at 13 plus weeks, whereas only about a third of either hybrid or online students are looking for semester-length courses. They tend to cluster much more at the 6 to 9 and the 10 to 12 weeks, which institutions would ask me many times over the years, okay, so does that mean that if we are doing 9-week courses and let's say the mode was 10 or 11, would that mean that our courses are not attractive to this wide swath of students? No, they're looking for acceleration, and the idea of institutions that one step is to make 2 terms out of your semester. If an institution were to do that, I'm confident that satisfies an individual that says that they would like shorter accelerated terms of one sort or another, unless perhaps they were looking for those things that Phoenix did or whatever, these 5-week courses or something. I mean, yes?
We do have a question.
Okay.
Remind us again, was all the data collected before schools went to remote because of COVID? Many traditional students might have had no expectations of remote, distance, or online learning.
Good question. Recall that the survey was completed this January and February with individuals that were typically planning to enroll within the next 12 months. That was the screener. So that would not imply that they experienced remote learning unless they were in the youngest quadrant and perhaps they were planning to go right on from undergrad. But they would certainly have had the opportunity to see everything that's been written about it over the last year. So just in terms of that time frame, that may help understand what their experiences, their lived experiences were, for sure. What I know from past studies, again, all those studies that I did over the years, only about 1/3. Carol and I did an annual survey jointly sponsored with Learning House called Online College Students Today. And you might have seen those reports. That I think it's in their 9th year now. We would typically ask the question, what was your past experience with online? And only about 1/3 of either undergrads or grads indicated that they had no past experience with online learning. So that was in and of itself an astounding statistic when we started seeing that in those studies. So any other questions?
Not at this time.
All right, well, let me plow on. The last thing is, what is their discipline of study, not their major, but in the broad buckets, businesses still leading, health professions and computer science, computer and information science topics have surged ahead, at least statistically, ahead of education graduate programs, which for most, of course, of the 20 years that I was doing this, was always the second largest degree area. Of course, there's all kinds of reasons for that. State after state that is either not requiring or not paying for their teachers to get their master's degree is one of those big factors. But what I will say is most interesting to me about this is the rise of computer and information science. Carol and I saw this first surge into 3rd place in a similar study that we did 2 years ago, in the 2019 version of that study that I mentioned already that we did with Learning House. And it seems to be staying there, and it's, in a sense, it certainly makes sense that is a degree area that is on the rise at the graduate level. Okay, I'm going to go on. We did ask some questions about the pandemic. Remember, having administered this in January, February, they had lived it for 8 months. So we asked, what is the impact of the pandemic on your enrollment decision? The two answers we had to give forced choice. No less likely to enroll in the next 12 months due to the pandemic is the dark blue. 47% of classroom students. I found that interesting in that I thought maybe classroom students would be most likely to be less likely, but only half. And I think that's a great accomplishment on the part of all of us at institutions, but also the students themselves in facing incredible fears that we all had. 54% of hybrid students said no less likely, and of course 65% of online students said they would be no less likely. So I thought that was really a strong endorsement of where we are as a population in going forward with our lives in the face of what is likely to be some sort of ongoing situation for some time, even though we're all hopefully vaccinated now and so on. Okay, willingness to consider online not post-pandemic, but since the pandemic hit. What we see is, with the exception of classroom students that were at about 50%, upwards of 60% said they had an increased interest. I am more likely to consider online programs. Not incredibly surprising. No change. We're at about 1/3 in all of the populations. And then the decrease, I am now less likely to consider online programs. That to me is the most interesting data point, not perhaps for the reason you might think, but look, I'm working on a hypothesis that these are individuals that are actively searching for a program. If they've been doing their research, they certainly would have heard some of the negative feedback that happened around the hastily put together remote learning that I've mentioned already, but it did not have an effect. There was this thought that this remote learning experiences of others would decrease interest for future online learning. And what I think we're seeing is that has not really had that effect. There's a new survey out that I read in Inside Higher Ed of the traditional undergraduate market that indicates that 25 to 30% of students have an increased respect for online learning after the pandemic, and even 25% among that traditional audience was surprising to me. But I was talking to a colleague yesterday who said, I believe that in the graduate audience, the adult audience, that this experience, even with remote, may have been clearing a hurdle. It was, they may have thought of online in the past and not done it because they've never done it before. But after being forced to do even the remote learning, it's they've cleared that hurdle and they're less apprehensive about it for the future. There's certainly surveys, the Gallup and Inside Higher Ed survey of faculty that was conducted late last summer indicated among faculty a significant increase in their comfortability, not with certainly with teaching, but also just with their comfortability of it being a credible way to educate students, which was, I think it was 15 to 20 point jump from the last time they did the survey. And it's kind of a version of try it, you'll like it, I think, in some cases. All right, I must go on. Please do break in with your questions if you need to. Information sources at the earliest stages of program search. This is where we're getting into the bread and butter of a lot of what we all do on a day-to-day basis. Look at these data, folks. Again, it was select all that you used at the earliest stages when you started your search for a college. Search engines, upwards of 80% of all types of programs. College search sites, there's the data point that I was mentioning earlier. Upwards of 80% are at least explored programs on a college search site, which was higher than I've actually seen in some of the other work that I've done in the recent past. Program ranking websites, they're upwards of 75%. And then we get into the traditional. There's still a role for traditional printed ranking guides. 66% of classroom, even 66% of online students. Social media platforms. This was the thing that astounded me, folks. as recently as 2 years ago, when Carol Eslanian and I would ask that question, that number didn't go beyond 25% that indicated that a social media site, like and most often an ad on a social media site, was one of their awareness raising sources at that early stage. Videos on YouTube and so on, and all the way down. What's interesting to me is those old bread and butter ways of marketing programs, what radio, magazines, newspapers, and so on, television even, it was far less frequently cited. It really does make that case for a big focus on digital marketing for our graduate programs these days. Okay, preferred social, we asked those that said social media, what would be the preferred social media platform for you to see information about colleges? Facebook led in all three cases. LinkedIn followed. My colleagues at RNL indicate that LinkedIn is fast becoming a fantastic way for many graduate programs to surface leads and so on. Write down this. Perhaps again, the bottom point might be most interesting to me. In a fast-moving period of time, only 15% were completely resistant to social media. 15% of classroom, 12% of hybrid, and strangely enough, the online student that you might think would be most amenable was most likely to say, no, I don't want to have that kind of stuff on my social media network. The next question we asked, okay, so again, this was a cascading question. What would be the preferred content that you would want to see on a social media site, since you say that you're open to this? Upwards of 50% said videos. Just below that, hovering at 50%, links and news and features. Below that, photos about the institution, short text about the institution. What was interesting is that the least attractive thing for them to access through a social media network is a live event. And that may be just a case of that will be the next thing that will be delivered in that manner. But it was kind of, this is kind of an interesting, we have a lot in the report. There will be a lot of these kind of cascading questions for quite a number of these things. But I did want to share with you today that data about the social media platform. Finally, have you ever clicked on an advertisement on a website? This is not just for the social media, but I did want to share with you. Clicked on an advertisement on a website or a social media platform. This completely stunned me. 66% of classroom students, 69% of hybrid, and 69% of online said yes, they have. And by the way, this is a cascading question that has, and what did you do? What was your response, and so on. So the report will have quite a bit of, I hope, interesting information for all of you that are marketing and leveraging these resources. We're
Scott?
nearing the finish. Yes.
So back on that other slide, I think that's where this comment comes in. It's a comment more than a question. That other presentations have ranked LinkedIn as the #1 search entity for graduate school searches, outpacing Facebook, Instagram, etc. You have any thoughts on that?
I'm not surprised at all. As I said, my colleagues who do digital marketing in the graduate and online space at RNL, in many cases, their primary social media platform is LinkedIn. So I'm not surprised at that at all. There are all those variations happen just because of who you're sampling. So I completely agree with that comment, actually. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to move forward. Again, interrupt me if there's another question. Inquiring and applying to programs. What was your first method of contact with the graduate schools? Information request form on the website led, followed by an email to the school. Again, this was select all that applied. Although it was first method, we did allow for more than one because sometimes people will do 2 things or 3 things all at the same time. So they were very close but that idea of the information request form is a really important way. And it certainly has overtaken the olden days when they would call the school and so on. Look at the attending a virtual recruitment event. We're at that threshold of about 1/3 that attended a virtual recruitment event. That's probably grown by 10% than before the pandemic, because we, as I said, Carol and I were seeing that at about 20%, but growing in the studies we were doing in the years prior to the pandemic. Attend a face-to-face recruitment event. Still 1/4 of individuals were indicated that they still did that even during their search. That very likely has happened and occurred during the pandemic. All right, what's the next item? How many schools did you apply to? Programs did you apply to? Only about a quarter or less applied to just one. Somewhere between 1/3 and a half applied to two, and 30 to 40% said 3 or more. This again, for the data, for the studies that I've done over the years, is a change. When I was starting to do this in the 90s and early 2000s, many of the schools that we would work with had this preponderance of individuals applying because they might have been the only game in town that was flexible and convenient. But as the decades, I guess I should say decades plural, have proceeded, there are so many more schools seeking to cater to that type of student that is looking for some version of flexibility, convenience, any number of those issues that lie outside reputation, quality of program, all those things that are probably in that quality bucket. We have a question in the study that relates to, at the end of the day, how did you make your decision? What was most important in your decision? Cost, or if not cost, convenience factors, the specific nature of the program fitting my needs or my interests, the reputation of the program, the reputation of the school or institution, and in the predominant of cases, the most frequent answer, I should say, was that the program was the best match to my area of interest. Even just superseding that issue of flexible convenience works with everything else I'm doing, and then those other answers following that in so many cases. Okay, the next, their expectations in terms of the time expected to be notified of admissions. Now, this was for individuals that indicated a rolling admissions point. And there was a question the last time I presented this, well, what about folks with a fixed application date? I might argue that these data would be quite similar, either from the data that you submitted your application or from that deadline date to when they expect, their expectation is that they be notified. And what we see here is there's a pretty short window in their expectation, as they're applying all their experiences about instantaneous service that they're experiencing in all the rest of their lives, even to their higher ed in so many cases these days. Here's perhaps the most important point, which is why I've made it so profound in this data, and that is, we asked, how likely are you to enroll in the first program that admits you? Between likely and definitely, we see 82% of the online students said that they're going to enroll in that first program, 89% of private, and even 83% of classroom students. So that kind of gives, that's that, we've probably all heard that term, speed to lead. Well, it's even speed to acceptance, speed to, speed is just incredibly important. And the last thing here, the three most important factors in your enrollment decision. This is what I was speaking. In my haste, I forgot that I had this as my last thing. Program content I want led the way among all three populations, followed by the availability of online hybrid courses. Of course, that was dictated by the proportions of the study that we're looking for those formats. So that explains that one. The lowest tuition, now during the years after the Great Recession, that was in the lead for the first time in all the 25 years I've been doing this stuff. But that has kind of fallen back a little bit to a more normal place from, for example, those years before the Great Recession, when we would never see it in the top 5, actually, in terms of the tuition issue. Positive career opportunities and job placement information being made available was also very important. That, to me, is the most recent thing to boil up to the top in the studies and surveys that I do. And so institutions are really well advised to have content on each program page about the career, what the program, what the graduates, what occupations the program can lead to, but also over time, the collection of data on the outcomes where the graduates are. In the competitor studies that I do for colleges, I've seen some just fantastic examples, data-driven examples in some cases, and then narrative examples in others of programs that are doing profiles and or quantitative graphics about the success of the graduates of each program. And it really is paying off for many institutions. So that is kind of interesting. All right, folks, that is the end of the presentation. So I do have a couple of minutes for questions, and I would happily entertain if anyone would like to reach out to me separately to have a more detailed discussion. I'm happy to. My email address is scott.jeffy, as my name, at Ruffalo, NL, Ruffalo, no Levitz, .com. And I, again, if anybody would like to digress on any of this at a greater detail, I'm happy to do that. Any questions out there?
Yeah, right now we have one. The enroll at first program percentage is high. Does that hold across disciplines?
We didn't. That's an interesting question. I haven't done that crosstab. This is a statistic. That is very similar to other surveys regionally that I've administered over the last 5 years. So it's pretty consistent. It looks high when a person first sees it, but I'm finding this pretty consistent regardless of where I am. So it's a good question, and I'll have to make a note to do the crosstab by discipline. That's a really good point. I don't have the data table here in front of me, or else I'd do it now. Any other questions?
So I don't know if you know this one, and maybe for Christy, who helps organize our webinars with the background pieces. Will you be sending out these slides for us as well? A lot of this information could be compelling and convincing programs to move faster towards decisions. Do you know if we're getting that, or Christy, is that coming up as a regular webinar, so it'll be held in the Exchange?
We can post it in the Exchange.
Okay, so this has been recorded, so it'll be in the Exchange, and give it a couple of days. Christy has to manually get them uploaded after they're recorded.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I will certainly share these slides, and you folks can do whatever it is that you'd like to do with them. The last thing I would say, and of course I've given you my email address already. I have had every time I give a presentation like this, somebody comes up to me, of course, when we were live, that said, I just wish my senior leadership team or whoever could see this. And, you know, particularly in this era when we've all become used to virtual, if anybody would want me to do this for some team at their institution, I really would be happy to do that. It's a half an hour of my time, or maybe an hour. I really am, you know, it's a great way to meet people. I love the interactions. So if anyone's interested in that, you could certainly reach out to me. I hope that's okay to say. I'm just, not every presenter is willing to do that, but I would be. So take it as you will.
We don't have any other questions right now. So if
Okay.
that is the case, I would think if anybody has questions to reach out to Scott directly. That way you can get them answered through him, as we have hit the top of the hour. And I know we have had some participation drop off as it's hits that hour mark. So if you're okay, Scott, do you have any other words of wisdom or anything else you'd like to add?
I don't. I could probably go ad nauseum, but I think I'll call it a day. And thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and doing a repeat of this. It does, I think, help our membership be able to see some valuable data that they can take back to their institutions and their individual programs. So with that, NAGAP members, if you're watching, if you have questions, reach out to Scott at RNL. And this will be on the exchange in probably another week. Give it a week so that way you can check out that webinar and any others that you may have missed over the last year. So with that, Scott, thank you so much for being with us today, and have a happy Tuesday, everybody.
Glad to do it.